I've been called a 7-figure entrepreneur, and a £1 million businesswoman, a design mogul, the UK Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and best-selling author. I've also been branded a school dropout, been told that I'm too big for my boots, and more times than I can count, I've been told I'm crazy and I should go and get a real job. Now, these are titles that have been bestowed upon me, and at times I have wrapped my self-worth up in them and not been able to define myself as anything else. But not anymore. Today, I'm here to talk about sharing your truth, your story, no matter what anyone thinks. And sharing your story vulnerably is unbelievably powerful, and who knows, you might even have the power to change the world. Now, the first time I realised that I was so attached to these titles was in my first ever therapy session with my therapist, Steve. And he asked me to tell him a little bit about myself. I just went into autopilot mode and started to list off all of my accomplishments. We've all done that, right? When someone asks us, tell us about yourself, we immediately say our job title. For me, it was entrepreneur. For others, it might be mum, dad, student. And so after I had rhymed off my list of accomplishments, Steve just looked at me and he said, "No, who really is Liv?" And it was a moment in my life that I'll always remember because I questioned my perception of myself, because I didn't have an answer. And it brought me to tears because I had forgotten who the real Liv was. I'd forgotten who I was behind the success. I'd suppressed the real Liv for so long in the pursuit of this successful businesswoman persona, I actually forgot why I was there and how I got there. I built this attractive character, this star, but I'd never really dug deeper or shared with anyone who I truly was. And it's ironic because I coach women to step into the light through my seminars, through my mastermind retreats. Now, when I say step into the light, quick disclaimer, I'm not a cult leader, but I do help women step out of the darkness into the light by sharing their truth, their story, and they do it, and it's unbelievably powerful. But the irony is, it's still my biggest struggle. Now, don't get me wrong, I have told my story 100 times, but the narrative has been very inconsistent. So if you read an article from the beginning of my career, it reads completely differently to my book. And if you pick up a copy of my book, you're not going to find in the pages there what I'm here to share with you today. Why? Because I wasn't ready. And that is absolutely okay. We all reach our point of readiness. But I knew this is something that I must do. I had my light bulb moment when I recently attended a conference, and the speaker on stage said, "Whilst authenticity will never guarantee your success, inauthenticity will guarantee your failure." And it was a light bulb moment for me. And so today, I am ready. I now know who the real Liv is, and I know that in sharing my story, I will change lives. So I'm here today to lay out the code for everyone to see that when you share your story, you have no idea the impact you can have in the world. So my story spans over a decade, and I'm only 24, right? So it makes me feel super old. And my story is split into 3 parts. Each part has been progressively harder for me to share. So let's start with the easy part, right? Part 1. I started my very first business when I was 13 years old. I used to buy nail foils, fake nail foils from stores, and I was feeling really ripped off at the price I was paying. So being a millennial, I headed to Google, and I started to Google how I could buy them cheaper. I imported 500 sets from China at 13. I imported them, and I sold them at market stalls in Glasgow, and also online. And I was hooked on entrepreneurship. So when I was 16 years old, my 7-figure business idea was born. My mum was selling a property. It sat on the market for 3 months. It wasn't selling, there was no one interested, there was no offers, and the property was empty. Now, I had heard of this thing called homestaging in the US. Homestaging is furnishing and styling a property for sale, so when the buyer walks in, they can visualize the space. And so I staged the property, and it sold in 3 days. Boom, I had my $1 million idea. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but I felt confident enough to actually leave school at 16 and launch it. Now, an A-grade student leaving school at 16 was not the norm, so I was immediately rushed into the careers office, and as I excitedly explained my idea, the career officer looked on in absolute horror, and she said to me, "You're ruining your life." And what she meant by that was, I was ruining my life, not going to university or continuing with my education. And it was a little bit disheartening, to be honest. I just explained this massive vision, and she couldn't see it. But this moment would go on to be a catalyst for me to really push me forward and make this business a success. I walked out of that office knowing I was going to do this to prove her wrong. We've all felt like that, right? When someone says you can't do it, it makes you want to do it even more. And so I left school, I launched the business, I went out to as many networking events as possible, told people about what I was doing, launched the business on social media. I wore all the hats in the business. I made the sales. I was often, carrying the furniture whilst answering the calls. And I grew my business to 7 figures in under 2 years. The end. Well, wait a minute, there must be a lot more in there, right? I didn't just grow a 7-figure business because of a pessimistic school teacher. I didn't just work 18-hour days, 7 days a week for no reason. Absolutely correct. I hadn't shared that part of my story yet, though, because I wasn't ready. Now, the second part of my story, I don't even know if I can take credit for this, when I accidentally unveiled in an interview with a newspaper reporter my next chapter. She had, my coach had actually warned me that this newspaper reporter would be looking for some juicy details. And I'm 24, I go to bed at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. There's no juicy details in my story. So I felt relieved as I started to reach the end of the interview. No mistakes, no hiccups. Then she asked me a question I've been asked so many times, which is, why did you leave school at such a young age? And my stock answer of, I'm a born entrepreneur, for some reason just didn't cut it this time. She probed me further, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. I had to tell my truth. And that was, yes, I left school because I wanted to launch the business, but I really left school because I hated it. I used to dread going in there every single day because I was bullied. I was bullied by a group of girls. It got to a point it was so bad that I actually left school, moved to another school to finish off, my school time. And what I thought I would feel when I shared this was pure relief. What I actually felt was shame. I felt the fact I was bullied, that people would think there was something wrong with me, or the fact that I was still talking about this, that I was weak. And so you can imagine, as the BBC article came out in national news with the headline, "Bullied schoolgirl to £1 million businesswoman," a part of me died inside. I cringed at the thought of anyone I knew reading this. But little did I know, this was going to go on and change my life and that of others. Overnight, I had 2,000 more followers. I received 562 message requests into my inbox. Messages from women all over the world, different walks of life, different backgrounds, different ages. I had messages from mums who'd showed this article to their kids who were going through something similar. I received messages from women who were experiencing workplace bullying. And I received messages from women who were on the brink of suicide and didn't want to continue much longer. And they felt heard. And for me, there was no turning back. What was originally a PR campaign to grow my business, grow my brand, it was so much more than that. And what I thought sharing my story was weak. But in sharing it vulnerably, I let go of who I thought I should be in order to become who I am. I realized that stories matter, and I committed to myself that day, if I can put my story out there and it impacts just one person's life, one person who feels like giving up, one person who doesn't know the next steps, then it'll be worth it for me. Forget the Instagram followers. This was about building connection. I had created a bond between myself and strangers just by sharing my truth. But this was just the first step. It wasn't just pessimistic teachers and school bullies that was the real driver behind my success. There was something much deeper, and I hadn't shared it yet because I wasn't ready. Now, the third part of my story is a story of resilience, and you'll see why once I explain it. And to this day, this has been my biggest battle to share this. This is the chapter of my book that I wrote, but I never published. But in not sharing it, I have felt like an imposter. Now, feeling like an imposter is quite a familiar feeling for me. Building a business at 16 in a male-dominated industry, I often walked into networking events with middle-aged men with decades more experience than me and tried to convince them that home staging was going to make them more money. I had hair exactly like this when I was 16 and launched the business, and I cut it into a pixie cut to look 5 years older. So that feeling is not new, but it's never comfortable. And it's the exact same feeling I have when I read my own story, where it says that being bullied was my main driver. Because yes, whilst it's part of it, it's not my full truth. You in the audience today might have thought, well, you've been really successful, Liv, but there's people that have been through so much worse. And I 100% agree. My story is not a story of being a victim. I'm not craving any form of recognition, and I'm not looking for you to feel sorry for me. But I need to own this part of my story. And the first time I realized I had to do that was when I was hosting an event for my own clients. And I knew that women in the room would have experienced, if not the same, something similar. And in sharing my story, they could draw inspiration from that and know that no matter what life throws at you, you're not only going to survive, but you can thrive. So the third part of my story is about being from a sheltered middle-class background. I had two incredible, inspirational parents who worked really hard. They pushed me to do what I wanted, so I was very fortunate. But at 16, I was being pushed by my doubters and pulled by my vision. And the excitement of launching that business at 16 very quickly disappeared when my whole life turned upside down. My family, my rock, my family of 4 very quickly turned into a unit of 3 when my dad just suddenly left. We didn't see it coming, and with that, I questioned everything I knew, every single value that had been instilled in me, and I headed down a really dark path of self-destruction. I thought at 16, I had the emotional support, the financial support of both of my parents, and instead the reality I found myself in was my mum being left with a heap of debt after working her whole life. So I had 2 options in this moment. Option 1 was to give up, and my God, did I feel like giving up. Option 2 was to find a way to turn the pain that I was experiencing into a fuel source to drive me forward. So I chose option 2. I invited my mum to join me in my business, and we built it to what it is today. We laughed, we cried, we worked long hours, but we managed to pay every single penny of that 6-figure debt down, which is now gone. And it's as Winston Churchill says, success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts. And so I realized through all of this that the fuel source of pain has been an addiction for me. Why? Because it delivers results. I've been able to unlock my potential. I've been able to achieve massive success. But my biggest fear was in sharing that part of my story because I'm letting go of the hold that, the fuel source of pain has over me. And I'm learning to tap into a totally different fuel source, and that is one of purpose. Sharing my story has never felt more empowering. I've connected with thousands of people through it. I've changed lives, and I found my purpose. Sharing our stories vulnerably is the most powerful tool we have to influence, teach, and inspire. And in sharing your story, not only are you going to unlock something inside of you, which is incredibly freeing, you can unlock something inside of others too. So if you don't feel ready yet, that is absolutely okay. I wasn't ready either. But what I do encourage you to do is look at it openly and think, if I was to share my full truth, what could my life look like? It's taken me 7 years to get to where I am today, but the important part is that I'm here. My story today has been very personal, but the message is universal. We will not talk about the great leaders of tomorrow if the great stories are not told today. Thank you.